I'm Rick Kaler. Thanks for joining me. But do you think the world is getting better or worse or neither? Based on a recent survey by Max Roser of the University of Oxford, you probably said worse. That was the answer from about 95% of the survey respondents, people from Sweden, Germany, and the United States. To be fair, it might have been good to put a time frame in that question. How would you have answered if the time frame was in the last 70 years, or 40 years, or 10 years? How about the last 200 years? I suspect if people were asked if the world is getting better based on how it was 200 years ago, there may have been more positive answers. In a recent article that is at ourworldindata.org, Roser noted that in 1820, which is about 200 years ago, only a minuscule slice of the elite enjoyed higher standards of living. Over 99% of people lived in extreme poverty, which the researchers measured as earning less than $1.90 today. Or that is a day in today's dollars. The number is adjusted for inflation, different price levels in countries, and currency differences. So it's actually $1.90 a day as you would think of it. That is extreme poverty. So as 99% lived in extreme poverty over 200 years ago, that's really improved in the last 130 years, or the next 130 years, as in 1950, which is 70 years ago, only 75% of the world was living in extreme poverty. 1981, which was 40 years ago, that number was down to 44%. In the last 10 years, the number of those living in extreme poverty dropped from 21% to 10%. Now that's pretty amazing, especially when we consider that 2/3 of those in the U.S. think extreme poverty has actually doubled in recent years. As surprising as this data is, Roser adds another factor. The fall in extreme poverty is even more notable when we consider that the world population increased by 7 times in the last 200 years. Conventional wisdom may have assumed that such an increase in population would have actually had the opposite effect. So what changed globally to produce such an incredible increase in the global standard of living in light of exploding population growth? The world experienced an unprecedented period of economic growth and increasing productivity during this time. What was behind that? My guess is that an experiment in democracy and free markets, which began about 250 years ago with the founding of the United States, had a lot to do with it. It's interesting that we've seen nothing about this trend in the media or heard zero about it from politicians. Wouldn't a headline reading, "Extreme poverty rate falls 50% in 10 years," be noteworthy? Or how about 130,000 fewer people a day are in extreme poverty since 1990? During the same 200-year period, illiteracy dropped from 88% to 15%. Global child mortality decreased from 42% to 4%. The number of those living in democratic societies rose from 1% to 53%. Even global income inequality, as measured by the Gini coefficient, while still very high, fell by 5% between 2003 and 2013. We've heard nothing about any of that in our national media. Our news and our politicians do not emphasize how the world is changing, but rather what is wrong in the world. Rosser notes, the media focuses on single events, and single events are often bad. Most of us know intellectually that sensationalism sells, and a steady diet of sensationalism can cause us to lose our perspective. The stories we hear of how financial well-being is in decline are not true. Such misinformation could be one of the biggest global threats that we face. Believing that the poor are getting poorer and the rich growing richer on the backs of the poor simply polarizes and divides us. If the truth of the progress that we've made became common knowledge, it could provide a foundation of collaboration and hope, which would serve to unite us to continue that progress. Thanks for joining me.